Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Now that spring is here, it's about time to get organized for those summer crops. And for those of you thinking about sorghum, we have some advice today. Here's SUNUP's Dave Deacon and our soil nutrient specialist, Brian Arnall.
Signs point to the fact that this may be a good year for sorghum. And Brian, what are some of the things producers need to be thinking about if they're thinking of sorghum?
You know, working with Rick Kokenauer for the last several years, our former sorghum extension specialist who's now left OSU, we put together a couple key items to be thinking about when we're planting sorghum. We came up with 4 really big keys that you got to keep in mind. The first is planting date. With a lot of the work that Rick had done in the past, planting date was exceptionally important. If you're south of that I-40 region, it's at April 1 you start planting, so planting time is now April 1 through about April 30th, April 15th, in that window. Ideal window for north of I-40 is at April 15th to April 30th window. We want to be getting in there. The idea is to get the sorghum in the ground, get it up, and really start beating the heat. We want it done before it gets too hot and too dry. And so, you know, sorghum has a temperature. You want to look at your soil temps to be in about an daily average soil temp of 60 degrees, which right now we're there. We could be planting sorghum about anywhere in the state. The next key is looking at the hybrid selection, and a lot of that comes more to a maturity group, getting good genetics for your region. So I always recommend talking with your local seedsman and seeing what genetics are working best. But pay attention to the maturity group. Earlier in that planting window, you go with a little bit longer maturity, but as you get closer to that May 1st date, you start shortening up your maturity group. There's a timeline Rick had sent me once that always put that between May 1 and June 1, when it comes to sorghum, you should go play golf or go to the lake. Don't be planting during that time window. Right. So stick with that, plant during that April. We've had great success with April planting dates in a lot of our work. We're averaging 120 to 170 bushel sorghum on a regular basis. The third key that we always have to talk about that I think has hurt sorghum in the past is soil fertility. Sorghum has always been that double crop or that secondary crop and not given a lot of attention to. It needs a significant amount of nitrogen to hit maximum yields. We have our standards in the soil fertility handbook and the peat sheets that I put out on your yield goal to final N rate. But a simple rule of thumb is thinking of a 1.2 pounds of N per bushel. And so if you think of it that way, you shoot for, if you want 100 bushel sorghum, you need at least 120 pounds of N. And a lot of sorghum producers I've talked to in the past, they may not put in that much down. If you want to shoot for 120 or 150 bushel sorghum, you need to make sure that nitrogen is adequate to get that crop to that point. Otherwise, you'll never make it there. Phosphorus and potassium and soil pH are also exceptionally important. And I like putting a little starter down with sorghum. It seems to get a good start up if the soils aren't quite warm enough yet, and gets that crop off and earlier. It helps maturing it up later. The final point is weed control. Weeds are a problem in sorghum because we have a lack of over-the-top options. So pre-plant weed control exceptionally important, and atrazine dual mix, getting something down to suppress weeds. We do have 1 or 2 over-the-top options now, but weed control, so we aren't fighting that, and that crop has as much availability to the water and the nutrients in the soil that it possibly can. Those are the 4 primary keys. There's a couple other things I like to tell people to keep an eye on. We have a sugarcane aphid that came through last year. Scouting for insects in sorghum is exceptionally important. We need to keep an eye on aphids and other things to make sure that we keep our insect populations down. And if you break those critical thresholds, go and apply. I also really like to terminate my crop at maturity with glyphosate. It helps with harvest. It keeps dry down, so we have a more uniform harvest. It goes through the combines easier, a little bit easier to thresh. Everything's dried down. But as much as anything else, maturing that crop with glyphosate or terminating it before harvest kills the plant. If you harvest sorghum without treating it, without maturing it or terminating it, it's going to be green after you cut it with the combine. Okay. That green is going to suck up moisture. And so if we want to follow sorghum with a wheat or a canola, we need to terminate it to make sure it's not sucking up any moisture that doesn't need to be pulled. And we need to prep for that following crop as best as possible.
Now let's talk about some of the possible following crops after sorghum.
So if we're following sorghum, we're looking at more likely coming in with a winter wheat crop, winter canola crop. And you watch residuals. You got to make sure with crop rotation that you haven't applied anything either going into sorghum or coming out of sorghum that can impact that. But typically, if you terminate your sorghum, you've got plenty of time to come in, terminate an early planted sorghum.
Right.
You have plenty of time to come in with a wheat or a canola crop soon thereafter.
Why is the month of May so bad for planting of sorghum?
It typically puts, if you're planting in May, and it's not an always because you know the way the Oklahoma weather is.
Oh, yeah.
So every now and then you get it wrong. But in the month of May, with the maturity groups that are typically planted in the state, it puts that flowering in August.
Okay.
You know, we want to avoid anything in August.
Right.
The plants don't like it and we don't like
Right.
it. So if we can avoid outside, so we want to get those plants flowering prior to August and avoid that heat so that they have good pollen, good pollination, and everything goes there.
Now, you actually have a blog that covers a lot of this. Let's talk about that.
Okay, so on that blog, we go through the 4 keys, the planting date, the hybrid selection, the fertility and weed control. There's graphs